Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Method to Our Madness podcast. I'm Stacey Merola, PhD, and I'm here with my co-host Bill Pate.
Hello.
And we have a special guest who's going to chat with us today about the impact of AI and data work.
Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, my name is Ron Wilson. I am the Assistant Graduate Program Director for the GIS, Geographic Information System Program at the University of Maryland at Baltimore County. I've been doing that for, as Assistant Director for about 5 years now, and but I've been an instructor in the program for a long time. And I've always played a key role in that program, even as an instructor, because I actually teach several classes there one a semester to keep going with the program and shape courses, the early days. But otherwise, I do a lot of quantitative research and done a lot of things in the past that I've created a bunch of publications and stuff. But I'm mostly an applied scientist in that way. I try to bring that applied scientist aspect to the GIS program as a way of distinguishing it from the other programs who I won't say they're not applied, but they take a more technical or an academic approach where we try to do the applied. So I've been responsible in that role of shaping that program, guiding that program with my colleague, Dr. Dylan Mahmoudi, who's the graduate program director. We've been a good match in thinking about this program and growing it for one. So, we've been involved in bringing AI in it. It was mostly my background in terms of putting that forward because for me, I got on it from a personality standpoint most of all, and we can talk a little bit about that later. But that's what drove me to do it because I see the potential of it in helping the way that I particularly think, but have taken it a lot broader in that, and it's really been impactful in my work, not only as the assistant graduate program tech, but my job and as an educator.
Awesome. So GIS, that's actually, I think either that or criminology specifically is the connection that I have with you, Ron, because Frances, when her and I started dating, almost immediately, I think between like dates 2 and 3, she had to go to a conference and she was talking about like how important it was and everything. And she went to the conference. And then later it turns out that that's the conference that I believe there was like a travel award that she had received for that. And so she got to meet you at that conference.
Yeah, that was Boston. We she was up there all by herself, and she just being the polite person that she is said, "Hey, I just wanted to meet you. Thank you very much for the travel opportunity," because she was presenting for us, and we got to talking. And I usually don't connect with a lot of my constituents because I was kind of busy, but I also, being a grant funding agency that I worked for in the center that I ran, I kind of like usually keep my distance in things. But there was something about Frances that I just connected with, and she was saying, "Well, okay, well, that was nice to meet you and good talking." As we talked for quite a while, and she said, "Well, I gotta go find something to do, as far as figure out what I'm going to do for dinner plans. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know anybody here." And I said, "Why don't you just come with us?" And we went out into this bad storm to this sushi restaurant down the road, and we kept in touch for a while, and then we didn't meet up till just by accident later on in Washington D.C. several years ago.
Yep. And then she introduced us, and then we started talking stats, cigars, bourbon, always fun.
Yeah, because Bill has a social psychology background, which, as a criminologist, you take that was most of my career, and because I ran a research center for a while at the Department of Justice, and you spend an inordinate amount of time in the psych literature, and so I was always fascinated by that, and I would never call myself, even though I spent a decade plus doing social psychology research as it applies to criminal justice and criminology. I would never claim that I was one, but that's where I spent my particular career. But I did it on the quantitative side for a lot of those years, and in the recent years, I've been able to bring more of the qualitative and quantitative sides together, which has made me very happy because I was never the type to say one method, one approach did it all. Quantitative tells you what, the qualitative tells you why. And without having the two together, always any studies that I did kind of felt a little shallow. Some of them been impactful, but they weren't they weren't what I wanted them to be. So in the roles that I do now, I get to do a little bit of both, and I'm really kind of happy about that.
So how has AI been impacting your work?
It's been quite impactful because I'd always had this notion of what science was supposed to be because of the work that I did at DOJ in particular. As a grant manager and running a program that focuses on a particular topic, one of the things that your main roles are evaluating proposals and leading the way from that. So these positions are really more valuable than I think a lot of people realize. Everybody thinks that we're just grant managers, but we've got to lead the discipline because it's where the money is. I mean, people go for your money. So whatever you come up with, they kind of follow. And so I have a minor in philosophy of science from my undergraduate degree. And I always had this perspective about science. And I really had this acute sense of the stakes in making decisions about what to pursue. And on the tail end, what solutions are most viable? Because as the both of you know, because you've been involved in studies too, is because of physical limitations, not necessarily our intellectual prowess, but the 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 trickiest thing in science is you can come up with all these ideas, well, because of the limitations of writing things down or typing them or putting data together to explore an idea, you really have to get it right. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of time and a lot of resources to pursue an idea that if it doesn't shake out, you've lost a lot in all that time, money, resources, and brain power. So, it's like think about some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs and stuff. They weren't always necessarily the biggest ones, but they were the ones that were the right question to pursue. And I mean, I think about doing experiments. Experiments are simple. You're trying to isolate one thing, but you got to figure out what that right one thing is. So let's say you have a project that goes right, and there's all these. You say, how are we going to apply this? What are our options for solutions? You then again have that same dilemma. All right, which one? What? How are we going to apply this solution? Because if you don't get that one right, the everything that you did goes to waste too because it doesn't get applied right. It gets applied too generously or too thinly, and it just doesn't have the effects that you're doing. So you had to struggle with getting it right all the time and really be good at that. So now from that sort of always at that thinking and really understanding science from that standpoint, when AI came out, I really was like, what is this? I vaguely followed AI from the days when my wife was going to the University of Pittsburgh. The Carnegie Mellon Center up there had a big AI thing, and as if it was the place where Herbert Simon was, and so I was kind of like, all right, I'm gonna look into this. So I started using it, and aside from the earlier days of it where it would just spew stuff and be overly nice, I couldn't believe the opportunity that I could explore so many ideas for plausibility than I could before, as well as putting things into organized writings or graphics to really look at things in ways that would take me a long time to program. So that's where it sort of so once I started using like, oh, I wrote this little paper, and now I can think about this more, and then reorganize it, and then say, okay, I've got this, and I say, all right, let's think about this idea, and talk it out. Because my early days with AI was to treat it like a sounding board, a colleague, to get ideas up. I wasn't looking for advice. I wasn't looking for guidance. I was looking for responses just to see if an idea had any merit to it, where I wasn't looking for it to tell me, good job, or that's bad. I was just trying to like explore. So then I was like, okay, I come up with, there were several things like, okay, those are bad ideas. And I got them all out of the way. I think about David Sedaris, who wrote one time, or said one time, is like, do all those bad writings of your comedy or whatever it is you're writing, get those out of the way as fast as you can, because that's all the crap. And you want to get to the good stuff. So I was getting through a lot of these ideas faster. Like which ones didn't have merit, which ones had merit, which ones had some things that I hadn't considered. So it came time to where I had to say, okay, I'm going to do some analysis on some of these ideas. And I started using it for coding because I was like, I know how to evaluate the code, and coding takes a lot of time. And one of the things that I was always deficient in, because I'm not a data scientist and I didn't focus most of my work on data, as you know, you and Bill do, coding comes with the turf in your analysis, and you have to spend time doing it. It's not necessarily what you want to do, but you got to do it. And that brings, unless you do that work so much and you have a talent for that, setting up data is, and writing the code to get what you want is a laborious task. And I was getting these things done in seconds, especially for my students, and being able to show them it's like, here's how this behaves. Here's a graph. Here's a curve. Here's an animation. And what used to take me weeks or a month allowed me to look at something and go, oh, that's not right, or oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's something. And so I started realizing what I was doing was passing it off, all of the things that were time consuming, and was now letting me explore more ideas than I could have ever done before, simply not because I didn't have them, but I now had tools to short circuit that and really spend my time on analysis and exploration and stuff. And at that point, I wasn't really looking to use the AI to like develop a method yet. I've been starting to use it more. I do use it more for that now, but it was the earlier days, and that was the days when AI was really doing a lot more hallucinating. They've gotten much better at that since then. So I really started realizing I was offloading a lot of things that was time consuming, and now like, okay, I'm really getting to the things that I really wanted to do. So I got more to say about that, but I want to kind of settle into that and to get started.
So it sounds like it's really useful to get rid of the tedious work, the time-consuming stuff, right? Because like in my experience with doing data analysis, it's like 80% of my time was spent, getting the data together, scanning stuff, making sure it was read correctly, go through, run frequencies, look for outliers, see if there's anything weird, just like meticulously prepping the data. And then you finally get it to
Yes.
that point, and then it's like, okay, I'm running my syntax. It takes 20 seconds. It gives me all this output. Now I'm going to spend days trying to get this stuff into like tables for like a publication or
Right.
something. It's
Yeah.
like the actual analysis was so brief, but it sounds like we can almost make that disappear if we can use AI to help us with our workflow. Is that what you're suggesting or describing?
Yes, it is partially what I'm suggesting, because that's only one part of it. I've written a sort of structure, because part of my job at the in the department as the assistant director is we've advertised ourselves as a program that teaches AI use systematically. And I've written a position paper on this that I've brought to life and starting to share. And my program is part of an academic department up there too, and they're looking at adopting it. And our program is going to be used as a guinea pig for some testing of bringing AI more flowingly into the universities. Universities are strikingly not yet ready for really delivering AI in a systematic way in the universities these days. But it's more than that, because so I'm going to start with what I usually think about when I talk about these things is I think about my job as I'm an analyst. I just go back to what I was telling Stacey earlier. I was hired in any job that I've ever had to be an analyst or a researcher. And what comes with the turf with that, as I was mentioning, you've got a code, and you got to check that code, and you got to make sure the data structures are right and getting that data ready. That 80% marker that you have there resonates with me very well. And you're given a task, and let's just say it's a month, and you basically spend 2.5 weeks of that, maybe three, getting your data ready. And then the final week is you're starting to do the analysis. Your data's all ready, with the data ready and structured, it's easy to run a regression. And then it's like, okay, those results didn't come out very good. So I put in another variable. I take another one. Like, oh, I think I need to do an interaction on that. It's a quick code to go back and do that. Put that variable in. So, you're spending time doing analysis and then writing it up. And so you spent like, a budget of your time of what you hired to do, as well as mostly being interested to do, and only a portion of it. So I gotta say, I love coding. You really do sort of feel proud of coding. It's like, oh, look what I wrote. And I brought it to life and everything. But that's not what my job is. And you sort of get bona fides and street creds when you do coding, and it's like, oh, that's pretty slick, that's pretty elegant. But that's not what I'm hired for. So, in an example where I had to write a routine that created a specific probability distribution for what I was testing and examining, and one that I had to use on a regular basis, would have taken me, because I don't know structuring data for these things as well as something like a data scientist or a computer scientist, would have well taken me 5 weeks to write. And I know people who work in big tech too, that like things that would take them months, they could do in short periods of time. So I, as having knowledge in probability and applying these kinds of things, wrote it in, I think, 2 days, the whole thing within a bigger method. And it worked. I tested it, and it was coming out with what you should be getting in the parameters and the ranges that you should get for probability distributions. And now I'm suddenly like, oh my gosh, I've got weeks now to do my analysis. And you start to realize, I'm like, what am I going to do with all that time? Because I'm not used to having that time. And you're usually under the crunch. But now I'm like, I've got oodles of time for this now, given the deadline that I have. Sometimes I get deadlines, I don't have that luxury, but I'm in a much better position because the AI did the coding work for me. I tested it real quick and I still got time to do analysis. But here I had like, oh my gosh, I've got lots of time here. And it allowed me to do things in a different way. And I actually did come up with like different solutions and adjustments to my method that I hadn't had, would have had otherwise had the time for. In teaching, it does the same thing. I go into classes and I want to show my students something live. Like I'm showing them what a distance decay curve is and what happens it is when impedance, for example, if you travel in any one direction is obstructed, or travel is obstructed, or it's much more free flowing. And I've been wanting to demonstrate this in a frequency plot and even in a map. And I keep looking at, I've done this before and I've written these things. It's taken me like better of 2, 3 days to write in the evenings to get it right and at least get it crude what I would, and then put together a presentation. But now I just tell the AI, hey, this is what I want to demonstrate. I was showing students what happens when you actually calculate a ratio to get some sort of index out of it. And I warned them that when you're using a ratio, it's asymmetrical. And if your denominator is bigger than your numerator, you're stuck between 0 and 1. But if your numerator is bigger than your denominator, then you're in infinity. And this is what asymmetric means. But you got to watch out because you can go to infinity, it has a negative effect on your curve. And when I'm telling this to students, they're like, what in the world are you talking about?
Yeah.
And because you use the quotient from a ratio to say how relative one thing is to the other. But I'm trying to teach them how to use it responsibly and what it really means. Because when I was in school, you really couldn't know. It was like they give you these examples and say, clear, right, that move on. I try to give my students visual examples. So I had the AI write me a routine that creates a ratio so that I can show what that asymmetry looks like when you're below 1. this is what the curve looks like. But when you're above one, this is what the curve likes. And once you start getting out at about 3-4 times greater, your numerator is greater than your denominator, then it starts to curve exponentially and it blows up your ratio, and it can be misleading because we do have that happen sometimes. So once I did that in 20 minutes. And sometimes I just do it right in class. A student will go, what does that look like? And I'm not afraid to get in front of my students and type it out and say, boom, here it is, because they get to see somebody use it in action. And yeah, because a lot of them are skeptical about using it. They're worried about being thought of as cheating and they don't want to get in trouble for it, but they also don't know how to use it. So that has given me so much time. I'm now wrestling with what do I do with all this time? But my job is an analyst. And as much as I like coding, I'm dispensing with it as much as I can. And the tools in all the major ones have a focus on code. And you can get them to be agentic, where they can like develop code for you and keep adjusting it and everything. And where I have one working in the background that is helping me develop some things that I want to do. And it's just kind of constantly I check in on it to see where it's at. But I also use it for trolling the internet to look for trends that aren't so visible. So I think diverging into another topic there, but that's
another
where
podcast, Rob.
Yeah, another
yeah,
podcast topic.
that's where I've got a lot to say about this. I'm sorry if I'm talking
AI.
too much.
The troll.
No, trolling. It's more like a trawler, like fishing boat trawler.
Oh, trawling.
Oh, okay. It's
The
kind of like
trawling
yeah.
like
Yeah,
scooping up
that's
stuff,
what
I
I
guess.
do. Yeah,
getting
that's
on
what I do.
bulletin boards and yelling at people.
Right, and I've had to sell it. I mean, I'm not selling. I've had to like set it and refine it to do it what it was, and it's finally getting around to doing what I'm doing. So in the end, a lot of this is just saving me time to be that analyst that I want to be able to connect the dots of things that I see coming. Because part of what my job is that I've got to keep the program modern. And in order to do that, you got to keep on top of what the new technologies coming out, what new researchers finding, what students are interested in. So I'm setting it up to help me with those kinds of things in an agentic way, where I create these agents to say, give me this digest of what you find based on these criteria and these rules and these intervals. Avoid these things, pay attention to these things. And it summarizes it for me to allow, it's like, okay, I can see where this is going. Because back to that grant manager job, that's your job as a scientist too, where you have to look at all the research that's coming in from not only the grants that are saying, here's our proposal. So you're seeing all the ideas. That tells you one thing. You're seeing all of the grant funded research that you've funded, come in preliminary reports, stage analyses or stage reports, and then finally the final drafts. You get to see it before everybody else does. And then you're mixing this all together with the current research that's published in journals, things you're reading out in more popular literature, and you're amalgamating it all together to go to the director and say, all right, Ron, your program's up for a proposal, this quarter. Where do you want to go? And you can't just go, I think this is a good idea, and I've seen this and that. You need to put together a solid scientific proposal yourself of what you want to have funded, because they're going to give you millions of dollars to fund a lot of research projects, and you got to get it right there. So I was really good at that. This tool allows me so much more outreach to amalgamate that in a way and explore it and probe what it gives me back that I never had time to do before. And as an assistant director, where I'm trying to lead a graduate program in that way, I'm using it in that very way to say, hey, I also monitor our competition out there. It's like, what are you doing? Yeah, okay, all right. good. Glad to hear that. Good for you. And I start to say, well, what can we do different? We don't want to be competitors to them. We want to be different from them because I think they have roles to play themselves. I think we don't have the capacity for everybody. We're not a right fit for everybody. So we want to customize this to students who really want this kind of education. And it fits with today's modern idea of communication and a product. I don't really think of what we give as a product, but if you put it in those terms, the modern society wants something customizable to them. And there's a lot of marketing and a lot of things are being developed in such a way as it's customizable to a good degree. And there's the podcast that I can't talk about here, but that was really talking about this new industry that's come out that is like, well, I hadn't really thought about that way. But to meet that demand, the AI gives you the opportunity to come up with enough material in a quicker way to be more focused on a group of students in ways that are much more to them. Oh, this is kind of directed at me because this tool helps me like put the material together. I have to back it off sometimes. It gives me so much, and you can control that. But having that ability to be able to explore those ideas. So I hope I've given you enough examples of like how it saves me time as a program director, as an analyst, and just as using it in everyday activities with my teaching of the speed that it can do by saying, hey, do this. You still have to be competent though. And this is where a lot of the issues are is like, okay, I'm a seasoned professional. Stacey, Bill, you're seasoned professionals. You start using these tools if you haven't already, and you know what to look for. You know what to check. You know how to test it. You know how to refine it. The people coming up today, they don't have that luxury. So we're kind of in a bind of like, how do we get them there enough to allow them to leap into doing that? Because they can go off and do the same kinds of things that I'm doing. So that's one of the bigger challenges that's coming with it.
I think you had mentioned briefly that the AI is now allowing you to like push your methodology forward. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. You've like mastered the coding, but now you're able, like you're taking like the next step forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but no, it does make sense because one of the things that I was very interested in my earlier days of education was I was always confused with the parlance of technique and method. And I'd be like, what's the difference? You kind of say that this regression technique is a method, but I'm like, I don't know. That seems like a technique to me. But the terms are loosely used, and I couldn't quite figure out what it exactly meant. So I spent a lot of time, and I went back to my philosophy of science roots and started looking at sort of all what this meant. And it just kind of it was one of those times it was like it was staring me right in the face. It was almost like one of those duh moments. It's like, well, it's basically you're stringing a set of techniques together that forms a method where you're taking something input, you're working with it, you're refining it, you're crafting it, you're analyzing it, you're putting it out, you're outputting it, and you're communicating it. So that's the whole method there. Now you could leave out the communicating part and maybe even the literature review. And if we just get down to like, how am I going to analyze this data? I started realizing, I was like, well, you're basically stringing a bunch of techniques together, but the world of techniques out there is vast, and the combination of them is infinite. So I'm like, well, all right, I use regression a lot, but I keep thinking to myself, okay, I hear I'm structuring the data, I'm setting it up to do this, but what if I look at a decision tree? What if I look at a random forest? What if I look at an isolation forest instead of using that? Or for example, if I want to do like back at my days at HUD when we were doing more experimental kind of things where we would use geography as an experiment. We were looking at just simple things like voucher holders moving here. Can we estimate if they're going to move here based on like a geography? And so I'm thinking, okay, that's pretty simple. We do that. We've proven that. But that seems kind of only the first step. There needs to be more here. So I started thinking about method more than just a one shot at something. It's just like there's a bigger method, like, okay, I'm going to do this stage, then I'm going to do this stage, and it becomes sort of like a meta method. And so I started like, what's the next stage of this? What do I follow? So I do this experiment, it works. I do the experiment over here, it doesn't work. What's the next step? So I've been thinking about, okay, let's explore propensity scores because now I'm starting to get the characteristics of people in these geographies. So at that time, I'm like, it's a lot of effort to set up a propensity score matching and
Yeah.
do that. Now I can do simulations with it because so here's the funny thing. And this is a way that I learned to help in developing a method is I want to test a method. So, and I don't necessarily have data for it, but I have some data. And I would ask chat, I said, hey, I'm trying to examine this idea here and I need a data set for it. And I have an example data set, but it's not big enough and it doesn't really have the patterns that I'm looking for. Please create me a data set like this. And so it created me a data set and I was like, wow, that was pretty cool. And I started analyzing the data and analyzing the data and analyzing the data. And I couldn't find any pattern whatsoever. I was getting nice bell curves. I was failing hypotheses tests. And I was just like, I started looking at more frequency histograms and scatter plots. And I was like, so I went back to the AI and I said, did you just create a random data set? It said, yes, you asked me for a data set. So I created you a data set and just at random. So its default was create a random data set. And I
Right.
was like, okay, I see the problem here now. So I said, wanting to explore these patterns because I want to see if this method can detect them by stringing these techniques together. And so I said, here's what I'm looking for. Create me a data set that will allow me to explore that. So it needs to have patterns that I can detect. But I also need it for it to not detect things too. So I need a couple of data sets so that I can test this in multiple rounds and see if it actually works. So it took some refinement, but I finally got a data set where I was able to actually test it. So it's basically like you do simulation. That's what I was having it do. And have either of you two ever had to create a synthetic data set for a project and how long that can take to like get it right to demonstrate what you're trying to do?
Yeah.
This short circuits that because
Wow.
the AI can just do it
Wow.
instantly and it can put in meaningful patterns there that will really allow you to test its sensitivity too. Because that's what I started doing next was like, okay, now I want to add a sensitivity aspect to my method to make sure that is this thing does this thing have some fluctuation to it
Right.
or is it going to be starkly different from one data set to the next based on based on some subtle changes to great changes. And I was able to create those data sets and make it work. Now would I hang my hat on that for an actual research project? No, but the point was to explore the method and have some confidence and be able to evaluate it to say, okay, I think this is going to do what I want it to do. And then actually start testing it on real data. And you can get early indicators because you can work with the AI to say, what might I look out for that I'm not thinking? Here's what I'm thinking. And you can get it to critique your work. And you can get it to be honest to you. If you control it and say, look, I don't want sugarcoating. This is real deal. I need to make sure that I have because I tell it, it's like there's always weaknesses. You can't tell me this is perfect. So it works very much like a colleague like that, and it's worked. I've been most of it done in the pedagogical environment because I'm trying to do this for students to see. But I'm actually was using it to set up an experiment because I have an alternate website for our program because our marketing folks have this one program, and I think that I have better ideas and they've got a good website, but I want to prove to them that if they do this method of communicating with modern generations, that it will work. And I can't think of a better way of doing that than saying, all right, we're a student body's a good pool of candidates because they're in school, especially undergraduates. Well, I want to test this. And so it gave me the opportunity to do that. So I'm setting up an experiment to say, here's our website, here's your website. And so I've been using it very much in the same ways that I've been telling you and developing a method that is much stronger than I would have come up with because I'm a slow thinker. I can't do it fast. So this helps me.
You bring up a good point. The whole prompt engineering, like AI is really what you get is really dependent on the prompts that you put in there. Are you like keeping track of, I don't know, do you have like all these prompts that you're like, okay, this prompt really works. And so you're like, use that again. I've been trying to figure this out myself, like, to make sure things are reliable across different analyses. Like, is there like, or could the same prompt give you two different things at some point? So,
It can give you two different responses, although they're often very similar to each other. But my advice to my students has been talk to it like it's your colleague. I found it gives me the best results of that. Now, having said that, I've realized that all these complaints about AI are really the fault of the user because they're not honest with their approach. And what I mean by that is that I am honest with AI and telling them it's like it was telling you, don't sugarcoat this. I don't want to be wrong. I think about Richard Feynman and his quote. He says, I'd rather be wrong and take the hit for that than be wrong and cover it up and let it be believed that I wasn't wrong. It was something like that. Because it's all about your integrity about how you approach science. So for me, I always take whether at work or back in my days when I was doing more publications, I would take my work to peers that I could trust to give me honest answers about my work before I submitted it. And it helped me get an acceptance rate that was much higher because I took the time to get honest feedback before I submitted it. And that just transfers over to at work. I don't always have to like have my stuff peer reviewed, but I do it anyway because I just am like that. I don't want to be wrong. To me, it's an embarrassment. It's a hit to my integrity as an analyst, a researcher, scientist. And it it would weigh on me if I did do it wrong. So I approached AI the same way. It's like, I want you to be brutal to me. If this sucks, then you tell me because I don't want to put something out there that's bad. Because setting aside the reputation of my division or my department, it's more about just doing it right because I see it as the work we do impacts people, and especially if we're sending students out there based on our education. I don't want to give them stuff that's not right. You're sending a bunch of people out there. You say you got 15 kids in a class, or well, they're not really kids, but 15 students in a class. They're going out in the workforce. They're going to propagate these ideas, and they go out to jobs that directly impact the public. And I just that weighs on my conscience to do that. So a lot of it has to be the honesty of the analyst or the user is it to say to have the AI give you poignant feedback. It's a tool like anything else. And if you want it to be nice to you and sugarcoat everything, it'll find a way to do it. But if you ask it to be honest, but you got to remind it to be honest every once in a while. It's getting better. Its memories are getting better. But so I just talk to it like a colleague where I have that approach of like, okay, why don't you be honest with me? And you better give it to me. And it does.
That's really cool. Yeah, because so many people, I think you're right. They don't know what they're doing. They're asking really basic prompts. They're getting, and they're only getting as good as they're, giving. And
Mhm.
so it takes that iterative process to make it better and to make it superior. But it seems to me that if you're able to get these huge efficiencies, especially in like time, I feel like this is going to be one of those things that really separates like the people who know what they're doing and the people who don't know what they're doing. Because it's just
It,
gonna, if you take away all that, time that, we normally spend on stuff, you're just accelerating things really fast.
that was the word that was coming to mind while you were describing this. It will sort out people faster with this because one of the jobs that are coming out now as so the days of like prompt engineer going to be the new next, big paying job that
Yeah,
fizzled.
gone.
But what's not fizzling though is that as companies have learned this and the people who are using it, what they're starting to do now is hire people to evaluate the work that's been put out where people use AI.
Mm.
So this is where you shoot things out there that's not good. You're one of those people on that side. There's going to be jobs in the future where people will catch that and they will shut it down before it gets anywhere, and your reputation will get ruined a lot faster where the people who do use it responsibly will go for. So accelerate is exactly it. I think you're going to expose the charlatans or the lazies faster than you would have otherwise. My closing thoughts on this is, there is a lot of hype AI. We're starting to see a lot of pushback on it, and rightfully so. I am happy to see that there's more interest in analog kind of experiences these days. We're seeing people go back to books. We're seeing people go back to records, but we're starting to see people want to do more socialization and do more analog things together these days. As a matter of fact, I saw a research paper that because of AI and the way that it's accelerated itself in the modern social medias, people are like getting really kind of turned off on it. And so from in the workforce, I think embrace it. It's coming. We aren't going to be able to avoid it, but I think taking it more seriously as a tool rather than this disruptor, because that's the way it's kind of looks like and the way it's being painted. I think if we stop thinking about it that way and look at it more as a tool and have discussions like this about how it actually applies to the work, we can get past the hype and have more conversations about it being used as a particular tool. Because one of the things in my agents that I do is it gives me 4 sections. What's the faint signal out there that you're picking up on these trends that I should pay attention to that look like they're emerging? And then there's background drift where it's like, okay, things are coming into the mainstream. And then I have it like the mainstream noise, the stuff that's really bubbling up to the surface and how it counts there. But I also have this section called cutting room floor. Get rid of all the hype because that's what's fueling the negative reactions to it, and we have to like tone that down and pay attention to more of the concrete stuff. And I think if we do that and you look at it as more of a tool rather than this thing taking over, I think there'll be more realistic conversations and expectations about what it can be used for.
Your comment about analog made me think I had been at a used record store in Rochester, New Hampshire. I think it's Rochester, New Hampshire. And they had a whole section of 8-track tapes. And I asked the owner, I'm like,
Oh,
you selling
God,
8-track tapes? People are buying 8-track tapes.
that's crazy.
wow.
Oh my! But that brings back days in my car. It's just like putting the 8-track tape in the car. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it. I these are fun to do, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Stacey.
Nice
It's
to
kind
meet
of
you.
cool to put a face to the voice because I just hear you on the podcast and stuff. So.
I appreciate you listening. So
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Ron.
I mean, well, you talk about things that I'm interested in. So, I mean, evaluation's not my thing, but you talk a lot about things that were, important to what I do. But I got to say, your last one with the logic models, or was it the last one? The one before was like, because I remember Bill was talking about that, and I was like, yeah, Bill, that's what I thought about him too. Because I think he said something that was just like, nobody wants to see those kinds of things. And I was like, I remember I had the same experience, like logic models. Wait, what? Let's give me something else.
It's thinking in logic models.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of been my experience with it too. Because I was just like, I was like, well, we could do this logic model. Like, we don't got time for that,
no time for logic models.
Like, okay, yeah, you're the client. Because I had the same things that you happened when you were talking about these evaluation things, not so much evaluation, but with clients where it's just like you can strongly advise them, but there's just some points where they're just going to keep saying no, and you got to do
Yeah.
the best you can in it. So, and that's the life of an applied scientist.
Yeah,
You
pretty
know?
much.
Anyway,
It's been great. Thank
Okay,
you,
that's
Ron.
been great. Thank you so much.